So right now, even in the carnivore community, there is a debate going on about vitamin C intake in regards to the coronavirus. But I think as long as you eat meat, you are relatively safe because you also less likely get sick. So I personally don't take any vitamin C additionally. I just eat meat and that's it. But many people think highly of vitamin C. One of them is Suzanne Humphries. I actually like her material on vaccines, but I rather tend to disagree on her take on vitamin C because she's not coming from the perspective of a carnivore or meat-based diet. And most likely her patients are actually people who eat a mixed, probably high carbohydrate diet, and then things are a bit different.
And talking about vitamin C it's an interest of mine, the vitamin C. Many of you may know that my primary interest is in the topic of vaccination. However, in the study of vaccination, what I have realized along the way is that much of what I learned in my medical education was lacking in details on how to support the biology of the human being. Mostly it was designed to suppress symptoms and to drugs that start with anti. So that tells me a lot. Now these drugs, as you know, they work very well that we can use in allopathic medicine, and when somebody's dying, they can come in very handy. But when people are just a little bit sick, or when they are healthy, as you know, it can be very helpful to support the chemistry of the body using the design that it was designed and the earth products that were put here for us, and not the products necessarily that the drug companies have made for us. So since I've learned to use vitamin C, I found that not only has my own health become extraordinarily better, but my prescription writing has gone down significantly, and the health of my patients has also improved greatly, because vitamin C does so many things from the time that we are conceived, actually, until the time we die. Vitamin C is necessary for so many processes. Some of the current research that supports the use of vitamin C even in the sickest patients that are in intensive care units. All right, so there is a lot of mythology in the conventional medical realm that trickles down and moves into society. And this mythology is mythology that I used to believe, and that is that vitamin C is, it's necessary to prevent scurvy, but it doesn't really necessary to be given in any higher doses than we get in our food necessarily today. Well, I found this not to be true, not only for my patients and for myself, but the medical literature and some alternative literature really supports that these myths are actually not true. One of the myths that you'll hear often from conventional doctors is that doses over 1,000 milligrams are dangerous and wasteful and just gives you expensive urine. We hear that the body becomes saturated if you take 150 milligrams, so no use taking any more. We hear that kidney stones can be a big problem, and we have to be on the alert not to develop kidney stones. We hear that there is no science behind high ascorbate use, despite the fact that Nobel Prize winning scientists have shown that there is science and there's ongoing science for the use. We hear often that natural whole vitamin C is always the best thing to be used. Now, food is always the best thing to be used first, but when you're really very sick, you will not get enough vitamin C from your food. Okay, I'm seeing nods. So, and the other thing is that we can get diarrhea from high doses of ascorbate, and we hear that this is dangerous and we can kill little babies and cause bowel necrosis. None of this is true. None of this has ever been proven clinically or scientifically. We also hear that you can get enough from food when you are very ill, and that also is not true. So animals use 4 sequential liver enzymes to convert glucose, it's very simple actually, into another chemical, which has this fancy name right there, and it is called 2-keto-L-gulonolactone. You don't need to know that. But then that shape shifts automatically into L-ascorbic acid, and this is the magic chemical that has so many functions in our body that enhance our health and can be very life-saving in certain situations and can be consumed very rapidly during illness. This enzyme right here, number 4, is missing from human beings and some other animals, some bats, some guinea pigs, and some primates. The gene that codes for it is present in humans, but it just doesn't work. We don't know why. So human beings and these other animals are dependent upon the food source in order to have this life-saving nutrient. So let's take a look now at animals that make their own vitamin C. If we look at a cow will make 18 milligrams per kilogram per day, and they will take in a total of around 12,000 milligrams, plus all that they're getting around here as well, okay? So he's making 12,000, or she, and also eating the grass and the greens, which have more vitamin C. Then we can look at cats. They make their own, 20 to 40 milligrams per kilogram per day, for a total of around 180 milligrams per day intake. Production. Now, mind you, the recommended dietary allowance for me is half of that, about, okay? All right, so now let's look at animals that are dependent upon the environment for vitamin C because they cannot manufacture their own. If we look at a wild gorilla, we'll eat approximately 30 milligrams per kilogram per day for around 4,500 milligrams. If we look at the guinea pig, the classic animal that does not make vitamin C, which I believe is why this makes actually a good lab animal to do research looking for illnesses in humans, is because they also don't make their own vitamin C. And they'll take about 30 milligrams per day, and again, about 33 milligrams per kilogram per day. So it's my belief that this is actually a good place to start in estimating what our baseline requirements are, even as human beings, 30 milligrams per kilogram per day, approximately. Now, this is me on a farm in New Zealand with 2 goats, the baby and the mother, and I found out interesting information about goats, and that is that when goats are healthy, they make 185 milligrams per kilogram per day. And when they are stressed, they can make up to 1,400 milligrams per kilogram per day, for a total of around 100,000 milligrams, okay? And one day the veterinarian came out to the farm to deal with some problems with the other animals, and he volunteered to us that goats hardly ever get sick. And when they do get sick, it's usually something so bad that it kills them. So that is, I think, very interesting anecdotal information. Now, I make none of my own vitamin C, and I'm told that I only need 75 milligrams per day, and that's about 1.2 milligram per kilogram per day. So as you can see, there's something very wrong with the estimation that we as human beings need, even when we compare ourselves to animals who make their own and animals who are dependent. It's a gross underestimation of our actual need.
I wonder what goats would be like if they were humans.
exactly. Humans are not goats, so you cannot compare it.
Well, there were problems with how these estimates for human beings were made, and I don't really have time to get into that, but briefly, it was done just on a few healthy men and women, very small group, and they looked at the wrong kind of cells in order to make this estimation of what we need. So the science behind this estimate is flawed, and some scientists came along later and said, no, 200 milligrams per day. And the authorities rejected that, even 200, so they still say 75 to 90, for 90 for man, 75 for woman, and if I'm a smoker, they say, add 35 milligrams. Well, I'll tell you that one cigarette uses 25 milligrams of vitamin C. So you can see if I'm smoking 10 cigarettes per day, I'm already tapping into my reserves of vitamin C. Okay, so I just want to emphasize that simply preventing scurvy is not the same as promoting optimal health. These levels here that they're telling us is for preventing scurvy, and they're still rather inaccurate because if one is to develop, say, influenza or whooping cough, those reserves can be depleted very rapidly. Okay, so I looked around to see if anybody studied the levels in the blood of vitamin C in people and what it is. And I found this study from Canada, and they looked at people who were coming in and out of hospital to have their blood drawn. So they might be a little bit sick because they're probably, getting blood tests. But this was what they found, is that 84% they said was normal. This 23% they said subnormal, and only 11.4% they called deficient. Now, what they call normal, I don't call normal, because they're calling greater than 28.4 normal. I believe that 100 to 125 is probably closer to normal, and I'll show you why in a minute. So I think more than this is actually walking around with low levels. But let's look at the difference now in patients who are in hospital and ill. What we find is that there's much more of them that are subnormal, 60% subnormal. 19% are called deficient, which is very, very low level here, 11.4 micromole per liter, and only 21% considered normal by their very low standards. And if we look at this graph at the bottom, it shows that the hospitalized patients are the black bars, and the outpatients are the clear bars. And you can expect some overlap. But what I want to point out is that both of these groups had some people that were up around 100 or 125. And this, in addition to other literature that I have read and the dynamics of vitamin C in the body, is what leads me to say, I believe this is a better range for us to live in. 100, 125, even 150 is easily possible with repeated, either high diet with this nutrient or with repeated doses of various forms.
What never is taken into consideration by those who suggest high doses of vitamin C, this is the oxalate issue. So this article was written by Sally K. Norton. You can look it up on her website. And she writes, if you're taking 500 milligrams or more vitamin C daily, there is something you need to know. Vitamin C in excess can become a toxin that can lead to kidney stones, arthritis, other pain conditions, and perhaps compromised brain function. I think that would be important, right? You should be aware of that. For decades, we have been told that vitamin C is good for us and may help prevent colds. But too much of a good thing can make trouble, of course. It's the dose that makes the poison. Research has not been able to confirm the theory that vitamin C supplements help to prevent colds unless you routinely engage in physically demanding work or endurance sports. So probably it's the exercise and not the vitamin C. The body tends to metabolize excess vitamin C into a corrosive acid called oxalic acid. This acid immediately steals minerals like calcium as it becomes oxalate. As the kidney remove oxalate from the blood, calcium oxalate can grow into crystals in the kidneys or elsewhere in the urinary tract, causing painful stones. Over time, if the kidneys are forced to handle excessive amounts of oxalate every day, kidney failure is likely. This is how taking 500 milligrams or more of vitamin C can promote a loss of kidney function. Perhaps the modern habit of taking extra vitamin C is contributing to the rising rates of kidney stones. One estimate suggests that half of us will get a kidney stone in our lifetime. It is very painful, apparently. So you don't want to get that, right? Oxalates in the body that are not removed by or stuck in the perhaps struggling kidneys can get lodged in other tissues of the body and cause trouble there too. Oxalate crystals have been found in every human tissue, including bones, joints, glands, especially the thyroid, blood vessels, arterial plaque, eyes, lungs, and skin. So you really want to be careful with too much vitamin C. If you are hypothyroid, then you need to be aware of this. These crystals are sharp and irritating, and they may trigger an immune response and promote inflammation. They may also generate free radicals that can damage cell membranes and damage the cell organelles, especially the mitochondria, which are important energy producers. When a cell attempts to dissolve the oxalate crystal deposits, oxalate molecules or ions may move around and trigger episodic pain or difficulty with brain and nerve function. Sleep, concentration, memory, and thinking can all be affected by the movement of oxalates in and around neurological tissues. Likewise, bone problems and joint pain can result from calcium oxalate deposits, which may become more likely when excess amounts of vitamin C are taken. So I will put the link in the description. You can read the whole article. If you are on a meat-based diet or carnivorous diet, actually you get enough vitamin C and you don't need to supplement vitamin C. So this was a study by Sophia Clements. She says the role of vitamin C at the physiological and cellular levels is indisputable. In line with this, blood level of vitamin C is inversely related to disease parameters such as risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and mortality in prospective cohort and correlational studies. At the same time, adequately powered clinical intervention studies consistently provide no evidence for a beneficial effect of supplementing vitamin C. Here we provide a framework to resolve this apparent conflict. Besides providing an overview of the widely known facts regarding vitamin C, we review evidence that are of potential relevance but are seldomly mentioned in the context of vitamin C. we invoke the glucose ascorbate antagonism (GAA) theory, which predicts that as a consequence of their molecular similarity, glucose hinders the entry of vitamin C into cells. Integrating data coming from research at the cellular level, those from clinical, anthropological and dietary studies, in the present hypothesis paper, we propose an evolutionary framework which may synthesize currently available data in the relation of vitamin C and disease. We put forward that instead of taking vitamin C as a supplement, an evolutionarily adapted human diet based on meat, fat, and offal would provide enough vitamin C to cover physiological needs and to ward off diseases associated with vitamin C deficiency. And I agreed to that. And so many others who are carnivores. We don't have scurvy. We don't. And we don't take additional vitamin C. We just eat meat. Period. This is the website of Paleomedicina. And Dr. Sophia Clements is a brain researcher. She says taking vitamin C supplements will not contribute to better health, even if it's not easy to accept this concept in the scientist's homeland. Vitamin C has actually become a symbol of healthy life, particularly in Hungary. The never proven mistaken theory that supplementation with vitamin C may prevent diseases has prevailed for decades now, despite all scientific findings to the contrary. The vitamin C frenzy has in fact strengthened for the past few years. When, however, researchers began to realize that vitamin C administered orally was not effective even in a daily dose of several thousand milligrams, the idea came up that it would be if administered intravenously in high doses. Nevertheless, it would not. So this is the study mentioned earlier, published in 2016. So this is an interview and question: would you please sum up the most important findings of this comprehensive review? And Sophia Clements answers: if we really eat healthy food, then we get sufficient vitamin C from our nutrition. Of course, it must be explained first that what we mean by a healthy diet. If, however, we don't take care of what we eat, it's all the same whether we take vitamin C supplements or not. Because if taken in tablets or capsules, vitamin C is not effective at all. To begin with, it's a wrong approach that we expect miracles from a single nutrient separated from its natural environment. When we eat, the food we take in is not in an isolated form. Thus, thinking about the effects of vitamin C, we have to consider numerous interactions that occur between vitamin C and all other nutrients. Also, taking into account absorption, biological availability, and selection. No research has been made into this question so far. However, owing to its complicated nature, such research would be rather difficult to carry out anyway. Perhaps it would be of no use either, as there has been no scientific study so far that indicated that orally or intravenously administered vitamin C indeed has a role in preventing any kind of disease or death. In the article, we go over what we know about the connection between various diseases and vitamin C today. Palomedicina says how much vitamin C is praised to be effective in certain diseases and how is that possible. Sophia Clements answers, there is a serious problem with those analyses in so much as they confuse the results of interventional and cross-sectional studies. Therefore, it seems as if there was a great disorder in the relevant scientific literature. However, there isn't. The cross-sectional studies have all demonstrated that high vitamin C concentration in the blood is associated with better health, while the interventional studies have shown without exception that giving vitamin C to patients has no use at all. It follows from the results of the two approaches that whereas vitamin C is useful for health, it will not help prevent disease if given in an artificial form as a supplement. Researchers published articles in the scientific media most often make the mistake of drawing a causal conclusion from a correlation, and for lack of personal experience with patients, predisposed vitamin C fans generally cite the mistaken view when proposing vitamin C supplementation. Evolution developed the route of vitamin C in the human body during millions of years. Vitamin C supplementation with pills goes against nature. Paleomedicina, you have said even stickier things than that, namely that the source of vitamin C is not to be found in vegetables and fruits. Sophia Clements, that's right. Vitamin C that is present in plants behaves from a biochemical point of view entirely differently from that found in animal sources of food. We scrutinize these differences one by one in our article. What is the least known in this context is that even heat treatment affects plant and animal vitamin C in a different way. At this point, we should definitely move away from the long-time erroneous assumption that not all types of vitamin C break down under the effect of heat, but only those that we find in vegetables and fruits. Very important point. And of course, those that are there in supplements. This is one reason why it is recommended not to drop vitamin C into hot tea. Vitamin C found in animal sources has a remarkably high heat stability. If you eat steamed calf liver regularly, you won't become deficient in vitamin C. See, never ever is this mentioned anywhere. Bart K has done a great video on this vitamin C debate. I put the link in the description.
Vitamin C, shall we? Yes, what a good idea. Good.
When you should consider mega dosing of vitamin C.
In my opinion, that's never, but we'll get to it.
Now, full disclaimer, I am not a doctor. I'm talking about my opinion and what I do, so you have to take this with a grain of salt or a grain of vitamin C, but we're going to go through it in detail.
Fair enough.
So what we're going to cover in this video is how vitamin C is critical to the immune system and specific cells within the immune system. We'll talk about vitamin C and cortisol and how it can actually crush your stress levels, believe it or not. Then we'll talk about when you should megadose and when you shouldn't megadose. And we'll talk about some of the research, but then we'll also get into a little bit of just some nerdy stuff surrounding the heart, which actually does circle back to the immune system. So stick with me through this whole video so you have the full playbook. And just remember, it's not for everybody, but it's definitely something to consider if you're really thinking about boosting your immune system. All right, here we go. So most animals create vitamin C. We have to remember that. Humans are the anomaly. So most animals have an enzyme that allows them to take glucose and turn it into vitamin C. Since humans lack that, we need to be popping vitamin C. That's why it's...
No, Thomas, no. Dear oh dear. We lack the enzyme because the gene that encodes for that enzyme has been knocked out in human beings. All human beings. Every single one of us, Thomas. That is an incredible, full and complete, total annihilation in the gene pool of that gene in human beings. That had to be positively selected for and or carrying the gene to produce our own vitamin C had to be negatively selected against. One or other or both of those had to be in play. The reason we don't generate our own vitamin C anymore is because that's the only way we survived as a species. At some point, something occurred that meant that the ability to produce our own vitamin C was deleterious. Interesting. That's the only way a gene gets annihilated, if it is absolutely aggressively selected against. Okay?
always pushed, right?
And, you know, he says pop vitamin C. Well, vitamin C pills have only been available relatively for a few years. Human beings have been around 350,000 years, Thomas. Well and truly the entirety, and then some of that amount of time we have been completely unable to produce our own vitamin C. We've never produced our own vitamin C as Homo sapiens sapiens, therefore it is not indicated that we are required to do so. And given that vitamin C tablets did not exist, given that fruit was seasonal, if we could even get it, which for most of the time that we've existed as humans we couldn't, the argument that we need to pop vitamin C for any reason already is looking like it's on very, very, very tenuous ground, isn't it, Thomas? Yes, okay.
This is a great book, and most in the carnivore community know about it. The Fat of the Land by Vilhjalmur Stefansson. And he was part of several expeditions. He has lived among the Inuit and eaten only meat. And he points out how this meat and fat-based diet has led to very healthy individuals, and none of them had scurvy. And Stefansson mentions in his book pemmican. Pemmican is what Native Americans used to have for provisions, and this is dried meat with added fat and no other things added. But of course you can add salt and add some berries. And they say it's even good for dogs. So Stefansson mentions pemmican in his book. Except for Thompson's implying it is wholesome in a general way, I do not find in his extensive writings the view that pemmican will prevent and cure scurvy. So far as I know, this is first stated explicitly in 1812, when as far of a recommendation which is looked upon as one of the causes of the Pemmican War. A. J. H. Richardson of the staff of the National Archives of Canada in Ottawa has examined for me some of the voluminous unpublished Selkirk documents that are in the archives, and especially the papers of William Auld, who is looked upon as being, with Miles MacDonald and others, an instigator of the Pemmican War. Richardson wrote on April 8, 1944, "I did some searching on my own account in the Selkirk papers, and I'm enclosing notes on the only document that looked useful among those I had time to go through. It was written at the time of the Pemmican War, which Auld and Macdonald themselves precipitated, and you might want its evidence on the superiority of pemmican to salted meat, and indeed its absolute necessity at the posts." Attached to Mr. Richardson's letter was the following memorandum, which is here copied exactly as written, including his footnote to Mr. Auld. Copy of Mr. Auld's advices, May 13, 1814. Gives his reasons for advising Captain MacDonald to prevent the Northwest Co. traders from carrying the dried provisions out of the lands ceded to Selkirk by the Hudson's Bay and Co. Among them he states that the seizure of these provisions by the Northwesterns the 2 previous years had led the Hudson Bay Co. from our anxiety to promote the welfare of the settlers to give up part of the dried provisions collected by the company's servants, as a result of which the company are absolutely reduced to our English provisions in their stead, which it is the duty and interest of the company's principal officers to prevent, as being most injurious to the health of the people, who during the 2 preceding winters have suffered much from scurvy, a disease entirely occasioned by salted and weak food. There you have it. And but too frequent, and especially at York Factory. The lack of dried provisions, aka pemmican, had forced the company to withdraw its servants from many posts this summer, and the Canadians will derive all the advantages of the trade, in consequence of their being allowed to possess themselves of the dried provisions. The conclusions arrived at by Auld during or before the year 1812, and apparently common among his associates, that pemmican will prevent scurvy, can be derived from the whole history of the fur trade in the interior of North. William Auld, H.B. Co. Super in... oh my gosh, that word. I don't know what that is. At York Factory, America, and likewise from the history of polar exploration, since the northern travelers began to use pemmican. Although the Pemmican War is considered to have started in 1814, which MacDonald orders handicapping the Northwesterners in their use of pemmican, The first serious bloodshed did not take place until June 9, 1816. How the Pemmican War looked from England while it was raging appears with a slant favourable to the Hudson's Bay Company in a privately printed and anonymous book which appeared in London during 1817. Statement respecting the Earl of Selkirk's settlement of Kildonan, etc., I quote and paraphrase just enough to show the kind of war this was. The book is dealing with the spring of 1816 on the Quapelk River that flows eastward through southeastern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba to the Red. Pembron and Sutherland of the Hudson's Bay Company faction were proceeding downstream in 5 boats with 22 men, loaded with considerable quantity of force and about 600 bags of pemmican, thus about 54,000 pounds. On the 12th of May, they were attacked by an armed party of about 50 of the servants of the North West Company. Mr. Pembron and the rest of the party were taken prisoners. The party were forcibly detained for 5 days and then liberated under the promise not to bear arms against the North West Company. About the end of May, Alexander MacDonald embarked in his boats with the force and the bags of provisions which he had seized. He was attended by a body of Brules on horseback, which followed him along the bank of the river. When the party arrived near the Hudson's Bay Company's trading post of Brandon House, Cuthbert Grant was dispatched with 25 men, who took the post and pillaged it, not only of all the British goods, together with the furs and provisions belonging to the company, but also of the private property of their servants. And then there was even a massacre. The Semple massacre was the most sensational episode of the Pemmican War. The story is told here to give an idea of the bitterness that underlay the whole struggle. For 7 years, the Pemmican War was waged through a combination of gangster methods and the dirtiest business competition. The struggle ended through an amalgamation of the 2 companies, accomplished in London in 1821. So that's how important pemmican was. They even waged a war on it. And what Stefansson writes about the expeditions is also very interesting. And he states, if only we have the humility to borrow the technique of the Eskimos and not to start trying to improve on it until we have first learned to grasp its principles and to apply its practice. On the Arctic prairies, one meets a culture which ceases to fight environment and instead deals with it by adaptation. No caloric energy is then needed for a struggle with the cold, because there is no such struggle. The difference between a Scotsman and an Eskimo dealing with cold resembles the difference between a human swimmer who comes up when necessary for air and a fish which does not need to come up for air at all. And Stefansson writes about his own experience eating only meat. I could be healthy on a diet of fish and water. The longer I followed it, the better I liked it, which established in my mind one of the first principles of dietetics. You never become tired of your food if you have only one thing to eat. I did not get scurvy on the fish diet, nor did I learn that any of my fish-eating friends ever had it. Nor was the freedom from scurvy due to the fish being eaten raw. We proved that later. There were certainly no immediate signs of hardening of the arteries and high blood pressure, of breakdown of the kidneys, or of rheumatism. These months on fish were the beginning of several years during which I lived on an exclusively meat diet. For I include fish when I speak of living on meat, using meat and meat diet as if I were a teacher of anthropology rather than as the editor of a housekeeping magazine. The term in this book and in like scientific discussions based on my work refers to diet from which all things of vegetable kingdom are absent. To the best of my estimate, then, I lived in the Arctic for more than 5 years exclusively on meat and water. This was not, of course, one 5-year stretch, but an aggregate of time within a period of 10 years. One member of my expeditions, Torker Storkersen, lived on meat alone for about the same length of time. Of course, adaptation to a meat-based diet is always a bit difficult in the beginning when you come from a standard European or American diet. But then he writes, after a few days, even the conservatives begin to nibble at the seal meat. After a few more, they are eating a good deal of it, rather under protest. At the end of the 3 or 4 weeks, they are eating square meals, though still talking about their willingness to give a soul or a right arm for this or that. Amusingly, and perhaps instructively, they often long for ham and eggs or corned beef, when, according to theory, they ought to be longing for vegetables and fruits. Some of them have mentioned hankering for things like sauerkraut or orange juice, but more usually it is hot cakes and syrup or bread and butter. In the years of our long sledge journeys, when we used to live for 6 months or more on meat, and when we customarily broke in a new man or two at the beginning of each journey, I felt certain that in changing from a varied to an unvaried diet, from groceries and meat to meat alone, the difficulty was wholly psychological. Thus, depending on the conservatism of the individual, the strength of his prejudices. I still think of this as the main factor, but I came to believe there might be subsidiary factors of consequence when the studies at Bellevue to be described a few pages ahead showed that in about the same number of days as are required by the novice to reach a square meal appetite on the exclusive meat, there takes place within the digestive tract a profound change of the organisms which live there. It is a common belief that the bulk of human feces depends mainly on the quantity of undigested material that is passed along through the intestine, the roughage. The fact seems to be that the larger part of the bulk is accounted for by the bodies of microorganisms that inhabit the digestive tract, bacteria, the so-called intestinal flora. On a mixed diet, these are very numerous and great quantities of them are carried along with the food in its passage. The meantime playing their part in their digestive process. Two things seem to be true: that the bacteria which flourish on a mixed diet cannot live on exclusive meat, and that their help is not needed in the digestion of meat. These bacteria die off when they cannot get starches and sugars to feed on, and are no longer there to furnish bulk. So that means meat eaters who take in little undigestible material, like those living on pemmican, find themselves on a diet that has only a fifth or a sixth the residue they are used to. In the digestive process, as it is on a mixed diet, and no doubt on a vegetarian regimen, gases are generated in considerable amount, particularly with those whose elimination is slow. These gases and feces have an unpleasant odor. We noticed in the Arctic, and this was later confirmed at Bellevue, that when we had been for several days on meat alone, all trouble with gas ceased and the feces became practically odorless. And here again, Stefansson mentions scurvy. This was their experiment at Bellevue. Carsten Andersen, a young Dane who had been a member of the third expedition. During that time he had lived for more than a year on strictly meat and water, and in fact being on one occasion cured by an exclusive meat regimen from scurvy, which he had contracted on a mixed diet. And Andersen had lived in a totally different climate. He had been working his own Florida orange grove, spending most of practically every day outdoors, lightly clad and enjoying the benefits, such as they are, of subtropical sunlight. And in that environment, he had naturally been on a diet heavy in vegetable elements and had suffered constantly from head colds. His hair was thinning steadily, and he had developed a condition involving intestinal toxemia, and the doctor would have told him to go light on meat and cut out meat entirely. That's very interesting. So it is interesting to note, during the 3 weeks of the Bellevue mixed diet and preliminary check-up, we had been free to come and go. Now we were placed under lock and key on a meat-based diet. Neither of us was permitted at any time, day or night, to be out of sight of a doctor or a nurse. This was in part the ordinary rigidity of a controlled scientific experiment, but it was in some part a bow to the skepticism of the mixed diet advocates and to the emotional storms which were sweeping the vegetarian realms. Nor was the skepticism and excitement all newspaper talk. And the only problem Stefansson encountered during the meat-eating phase of the experiment was when they went on lean meat for too long. So fat is really important, fat intake. So again, we don't need any supplementation of vitamin C if we are on a meat-based diet. Even as little as 10 milligrams is enough to avoid scurvy. And as Stefansson so clearly has pointed out, nobody in his team who was on a meat-based diet has ever suffered scurvy.